Canada, a nation historically intertwined with the United States as its largest trading partner, has abruptly halted all imports of American automobiles. This development goes beyond mere tariffs or political rhetoric. It's a narrative of families, witnessing their livelihoods at risk, dealerships becoming deserted, and entire communities fearing economic collapse. Prime Minister Mark Carney's firm stance and President Trump's America First response have set the stage for uncertainty. The crucial questions now are: how did this situation evolve? Why did Canada take such drastic measures, and what implications? Does this hold for the auto industry on both sides of the border? As tensions escalate, the repercussions are immediate and widespread. Factories relying on seamless parts from across the border face delays, steel mills in Ontario reduce output, and electronics plants in Quebec scramble for new suppliers. Engine foundries in the prairies have halted production as shipments stall from the United States. In Montreal, Martin Desjardins, a parts manufacturer, faces the harsh reality as a major American client suspends all future orders until the tariff dispute settles. Desperate for a solution, Martin pleads with the Texan buyer for flexibility only. To receive a final and chilling response, all non-essential imports are being cut. The Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters Association estimates that $400 million worth of auto parts are now stranded at the border, with analysts warning that this disruption could trigger a chain reaction throughout the automotive supply chain. As small manufacturers struggle to adapt, consumers nationwide confront tough decisions, testing both brand loyalty and financial prudence in the face of this unprecedented trade rift. As news of the tariffs spread, Canadian car buyers quickly changed course. A new survey from the Automotive Consumers Association found that 60% of potential buyers in Toronto and Vancouver were now unwilling to consider vehicles made in the US. The impact was immediate and deeply personal. At a suburban Toronto dealership, the Singh family wrestled with a decision. Should they still buy the hybrid SUV they'd been eyeing? Ravinder Singh, a logistics manager, had long had his heart set on a Ford Explorer, but the new tariffs pushed the price well beyond their budget. His wife, Priya, pointed to a Japanese SUV nearby, noting the dealer's claim of tariff-free pricing. Ravinder found himself torn between his loyalty to North American manufacturing and the reality of rising costs. Inside the dealership, management had just issued new orders, shift the focus to European and Asian brands. Staff were told to highlight features and prices that American models could no longer compete with. Sales scripts were rewritten and a retraining session was scheduled for the following morning. As the Singhs moved on to test another model, a salesperson quietly removed a sold sticker from a Ford Explorer that was now unlikely to leave the lot. In a back office, the dealership's owner reviewed new projections. Customer traffic had fallen by 40%, and vehicles were now sitting on the lot 3 times longer than usual. The message was clear. Brand loyalty was no longer driving sales. Consumers were making hard financial choices, and US-made vehicles were losing ground. Across Canada, dealerships are struggling. In Calgary, showroom visits are down by 40%, and cars are lingering on lots for an average of 90 days, triple the previous norm. Sales manager Brian Hughes reported a steep drop in walk-ins and a surge in cancelled deals as buyers balk at the increased prices. In Halifax, longtime customers like Eleanor McIntyre are pulling out of deals. She recently cancelled financing on a new pickup, citing the tariffs as the deciding factor. Dealerships that once thrived on customer loyalty to brands like Ford and Chevrolet are now seeing even their most devoted clients explore alternatives. Regional managers are warning of restructurings and possible closures unless sales rebound soon. Some dealerships have already begun shifting their attention to non-American brands, hoping to bring buyers back through the doors. As vehicle prices soar and customer interest wanes, many Canadian dealerships fear they're teetering on the edge of financial collapse. These aren't isolated struggles. Across the country, dealerships are experiencing the same grim reality, and the broader economy is beginning to show the weight of this mounting pressure. After analyzing numerous reports and insider data, we've identified a staggering 4.4 million American jobs that are potentially at risk. If you want to understand how this trade standoff is directly impacting everyday families and communities, you're in the right place. Hit subscribe and drop a like to stay on top of our in-depth coverage. Supply chains under siege. At the port of Vancouver, silence hangs heavy in the air. Cranes sit idle beneath the early morning sky, a visual symbol of a supply chain brought to its knees. Across Canada, logistics managers watch in frustration as vital auto components, brake systems, engine blocks, and electronic modules begin to pile up along railways and highways. The just-in-time manufacturing model, long celebrated for its E&O efficiency, has become its greatest vulnerability. The sudden imposition of tariffs has created a de facto blockade at the border, disrupting the steady flow of parts that Canada's auto industry depends on. In Windsor, the CEO of a leading Canadian parts supplier gathered his executive team in a glass-walled conference room. His message was direct and urgent. "We are facing a supply chain siege." Beside him, the Vice President of Logistics from Motor FRA nodded grimly. The industries of Canada and the US are deeply interconnected, like interlocking gears in a machine, and now even a single disruption threatens to stall the entire system. Analysts have long studied the fragility of modern supply chains, but few predicted a disruption on this scale. The Canadian Manufacturers Association now estimates that nearly $400 million in auto parts will be delayed in the first month alone. Automakers across Ontario, Quebec, and the Prairies are already being forced to slow or halt production entirely. Out west, at a roadside diner near Kamloops, British Columbia, truck driver Leah Chong sits through an unexpected layover. Shipments, bound for the US, are being rerouted to temporary storage, clogging logistics hubs and choking revenue streams. The entire industry is now bracing for what could be the most severe trade disruption North America has seen in decades. As customs paperwork backed up ports, trucker Leah Chong sipped her coffee and vented, "If we can't move parts, what are we even hauling?" Her frustration mirrored a growing crisis. Logistics across Canada were grinding to a halt, threatening jobs from coast to coast. Moments later, a dispatch alert came through. American factories and communities were now feeling the blowback. States begin to crack. In Michigan, long a symbol of U.S. manufacturing might, assembly lines fell silent. Once busy stamping presses sat idle. In Ohio, nearly a third of parts suppliers' workforce was laid off as technicians specializing in axles and brake calipers were sent home. Even in Texas, traditionally powered by oil, not auto, engine parts stranded on railways brought operations to a crawl. The job toll was staggering. 4.4 million U.S. positions were now at risk. This sobering number rippled through union halls and corporate boardrooms. On the Senate floor, Michigan Senator Mary Cunningham clutched a stack of briefings. Her voice trembled. "Our manufacturing heartland is under siege. This tariff war threatens every community it touches." Local governments began to feel the squeeze. Tax revenues fell as plants slowed, and a Michigan auditor's report warned of a multi-billion-dollar budget gap affecting everything from school maintenance to road repairs. In Detroit, teacher Robert Morales feared class sizes would grow beyond control. Polls showed 65% of residents in manufacturing-heavy states believed the conflict directly threatened their family incomes. Community centers in Toledo and Flint were overwhelmed by anxious residents worried about job loss, home values, and the future. Michigan's governor convened an emergency council. Ohio and Texas issued a joint plea for resolution. As negotiations loomed, the threat of unrest hung thick in the air, an entire region bracing for fallout from decisions made thousands of kilometers away. Ottawa. Fires. Back in Canada, Prime Minister Mark Carney stood beneath Parliament's Peace Tower to announce a firm countermeasure. Canada would match U.S. tariffs with its own on American auto exports. Light-duty trucks, SUVs, and passenger cars would now face new duties. Though tariff rates varied, the signal was unmistakable. Canada wouldn't be pushed around. Behind closed doors, Carney's cabinet debated the risks. Some feared retaliation and deeper economic pain. Others argued national pride demanded a strong response. Carney ultimately sided with sovereignty, even if it meant short-term economic sacrifice. Conservative opposition leaders criticized the move, calling it overreach and advocating for selective exemptions instead of blanket tariffs. Policy papers circulated, warning of higher consumer prices and unpredictable production outcomes. But Carney also announced incentives to shield and strengthen Canada's auto industry. Subsidies, tax credits, and low-interest loans to encourage the purchase and production of Canadian-made electric vehicles. It was a two-pronged approach: fight back in the short term and build resilience for the long haul. Carney's twin-pronged approach wasn't just about retaliation, it was a bet on the future. By combining retaliatory tariffs with ambitious green energy incentives, the government aimed to defend Canadian industry and accelerate the nation's transition to a cleaner economy. The move triggered nationwide debate. News panels dissected the plan, questioning whether it was smart economics or symbolic defiance. Meanwhile, social media lit up with hashtags like #FODU defend Canadian jobs, often paired with striking images of maple leaves wrapped around EV charging stations. Cabinet insiders later admitted the dual strategy was intentional. Fight back against U.S. pressure while seizing a rare chance to drive homegrown innovation. But for many Canadians, that big-picture ambition clashed with daily survival. Small businesses in the crossfire. In a cramped Vancouver repair shop, mechanic Arav Sharma stared at a stack of invoices that had tripled in a matter of weeks. Nearby, his daughter Mira quietly did homework, occasionally glancing at her father as he sighed heavily. Tariffs had rippled through the supply chain, doubling the cost of critical parts he relied on, most of them imported from the US. According to the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, small repair shops and parts remanufacturers had seen average revenue drops of 70%. For entrepreneurs like Arav, these weren't just numbers, they were existential threats. His family had built this shop from scratch. 2 decades ago, his father started with a single hydraulic lift and a dream of serving the community. Now, Arav found himself drafting a letter to his landlord asking for a rent reduction, something he never imagined needing. In Winnipeg, a local remanufacturer specializing in transmissions laid off half its workforce. A union rep summed it up grimly. Workers understand the politics, but they're more worried about putting food on the table. Across the country, small business owners gathered for emergency town halls from Halifax to Edmonton. They exchanged stopgap strategies, bulk buying from alternative suppliers, tweaking labor shifts, lobbying elected officials for relief. But even with grassroots coordination, the atmosphere was one of triage. The feeling that lingered, survival was no longer guaranteed. The feeling of being swept up in an economic crisis was impossible to ignore. Late one night, Arav's shop. Phone rang. On the other end, a voice delivered a crushing blow. A key parts distributor was immediately shutting down operations in Canada. Arav closed his eyes, bracing for yet another setback in a battle for survival that had grown far beyond his expectations. As business owners struggled to adapt, attention began to shift toward larger political responses and long-term planning. Everyone involved understood that only resilience would determine who made it through this economic storm. With tensions rising, the mood in Canadian campaign headquarters shifted dramatically. As the auto boycott deepened, riding-by-riding polls began to show that previously reliable Liberal strongholds, especially in southwestern Ontario, where several major assembly plants were located, were slipping. Voter sentiment was turning sour. Pollsters found that nearly half the residents in crucial districts viewed the trade conflict and tariffs as direct threats to their family incomes. Federal campaigns quickly mobilized. Opposition candidates staged press events at shuttered dealerships, portraying the economic turmoil as the government's fault. In Windsor, a veteran electrician named Paul Tremble captured the sentiment. "If my vote can't help protect my job, what's the point?" His frustration echoed through packed community centers, where town hall meetings overflowed and traditional party loyalties began to erode under the weight of economic fear. Conservative challengers blasted Prime Minister Carney, accusing him of leading Canada into an avoidable confrontation and claiming that carefully targeted exemptions could have avoided putting so many jobs at risk. In response, Carney launched a high-stakes national tour, meeting with auto workers and small business owners to defend his policy. He argued that confronting unfair trade now would preserve Canada's industrial future in the long run. His message was full of patriotic rhetoric. This is about dignity, prosperity, and defending the heart of our nation. But behind the scenes, his advisors were growing concerned. Each campaign stop seemed to stir anxiety rather than calm it. Internal polling painted a grim picture. Support for the Liberals had dropped by up to 10 points in key swing ridings in Quebec and Alberta. Increasingly, the upcoming election appeared to be turning into a referendum on the auto boycott. Within weeks, leaks suggested a leadership challenge was brewing inside the Liberal Party, highlighting how politically fragile the situation had become. As the public mood continued to shift, union leaders prepared to raise their voices in Parliament, intent on influencing the national debate. In Toronto, on a brisk morning outside the Canadian Auto Workers Union Hall, hundreds gathered. Some wore oil-stained work clothes, others sharp uniforms, all united under banners reading "Jobs Before Tariffs." The chants demanding federal protections echoed through the streets. Inside, union leaders unveiled a plan for a Jobs Protection Pact, a guarantee that no Canadian auto worker would lose their job due to the tariff standoff. In a dim, smoke-filled back room, Simone Levesque, a second-generation tool and die maker, spoke of her family's deep roots in the industry. Her voice carried both pride and worry. "We built this industry with our hands and backs. We deserve a plan that protects us, not policies that divide us." At the podium, Union President Michael Fitzgerald listed their demands. Wage insurance, For displaced workers, retraining programs co-funded by federal and provincial governments, and a freeze on further trade escalation. His speech was marked by a recurring theme: we're asking for protection, not a trade war. Outside, small groups swapped stories and shared organizing tips. One young apprentice said his first week on the job had ended in fear, unsure whether his contract would survive the uncertainty. Others pledged solidarity and discussed lobbying their local MPs. As the day ended and the doors of the Union Hall closed at dusk, ballots were handed out for a national strike vote, just in case negotiations fell apart. As labor unity began to wane with the setting sun, attention shifted south to Washington, where U.S. lawmakers were becoming increasingly uneasy about the wave of job losses unfolding across the border. In America's capital, the mood was one of growing alarm as economic warning signs intensified. In the stately hearing chamber of the House Ways and Means Committee, top executives from leading automakers were grilled by lawmakers. Charts displayed stark figures, layoffs spreading through Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. Industry leaders warned that the escalating trade conflict with Canada threatened to inflict lasting harm. Our manufacturing networks rely deeply on Canadian suppliers, said Linda Martinez, Chief Operating Officer for North America at AutoCP. Without stability, we risk losing jobs in both countries. The Senate took up the issue next, where Michigan Senator Robert Caldwell sharply criticized the administration's go-it-alone tariff approach. He argued it failed to consider the deeply interconnected nature of North America's supply chains, warning that over 4.4 million American jobs, from factory workers to parts distributors, were now at risk. At the White House, the press secretary reiterated President Trump's focus on protecting American workers, but confirmed that behind closed doors, officials were exploring selective exemptions for specific auto components. Quiet back-channel negotiations with Canada were underway, kept deliberately low profile to avoid the appearance of retreat. Diplomatic cables revealed tense exchanges between Carney's office and the Trump administration, each side tightly controlling information to prevent damaging leaks. Meanwhile, in the Senate, a rare bipartisan effort to temporarily suspend auto tariffs began to gather momentum, though its prospects for passage remained uncertain. Washington was caught in a storm of competing priorities. Economic nationalism clashed with the pragmatic concerns of industry leaders. Lawmakers struggled to reconcile pressure from labor unions, business executives, and the White House's broader America First agenda. As Congress prepared to reconvene the following week, anticipation was high. Would they manage to pull the situation back from the edge, or would the dispute spiral into a full-blown trade war? Media attention soon magnified the stakes, shaping public opinion on both sides of the border. In newsrooms from Toronto to New York, reporters covered each twist with intensity. Canadian headlines analyzed the pros and cons of Carney's retaliatory tariffs, while American publications debated whether the president's hardline approach was a long-overdue correction or a reckless misstep. Juxtaposed headlines from outlets like the Toronto Star, National Post, New York Times, and Washington Post revealed wildly different narratives. Canada portrayed as the scrappy defender of sovereignty, and the U.S. as a burdened giant guarding its economic turf. Online, tensions played out in real time. Hashtags like Oanchu, Number by North, and the Auto Freedom trended sporadically, fueling heated debates. One viral clip featured a British Columbia car dealer delivering an impassioned rant against American arrogance, drawing praise from some, ridicule from others. Influencers with massive followings jumped into the fray. Some called for digital boycotts of American brands, while others urged diplomacy and compromise. Podcasts and talk radio shows from Vancouver to Minneapolis featured fiery roundtable discussions with economists and labor leaders, adding more voices to an already charged conversation. As political analysts and strategists took to the airwaves, audiences were met with sharply contrasting interpretations, one moment warning of imminent economic collapse, the next suggesting that a sensible resolution was just around the corner. Amid this noise, a young Canadian vlogger went viral after live-streaming from a vacant lot lined with unsold American vehicles, a haunting symbol of the human toll behind the escalating trade conflict. The video quickly amassed millions of views, prompting major U.S. news networks to dispatch crews to similar scenes in Detroit and Buffalo. This surge in media attention didn't just inform, it influenced. Public opinion began to shift, and with it, the political calculus. The battle for narrative dominance became just as critical as any negotiation behind closed doors. What people believed about the crisis, its causes, its consequences, its villains and victims, began to shape real policy decisions. Shockwaves. Across the global auto industry, Canada's retaliatory boycott and Ottawa's aggressive policy responses triggered alarm in automotive boardrooms across the globe, from Munich to Seoul to Tokyo. At a BMW executive summit outside Munich, an emergency circle formed to assess the fallout. Forecasts showed that as much as 20% of their North American vehicle output relied on Canadian-made subcomponents. One executive warned that if the disruptions lasted more than 6 months, Volkswagen plants in Germany could be forced to scale back production. European Commission officials began quietly drafting a support package, proposals for transitional credits to help European parts suppliers weather the North American turbulence. Meanwhile, in Seoul, Hyundai's leadership weighed reallocating part of its U.S. production in Georgia to newly expanding facilities in Mexico. Over in Tokyo, Toyota's global supply chain team moved fast, placing contingency orders with alternative suppliers in Southeast Asia. The chaos laid bare a sobering truth. The modern automotive sector, built on just-in-time logistics and sprawling cross-border dependencies, was far more fragile than previously imagined. Assembly lines that had once run at full capacity now faced the possibility of costly pauses or full shutdowns. Trade publications around the world began referring to the crisis as an automotive earthquake, a term that captured the shockwaves shaking an entire industry. Back in Canada, government officials scrambled to respond. Emergency funding for domestic suppliers had to be carefully allocated, not only to meet urgent needs, but also to strengthen long-term competitiveness. Subsidies for electric vehicle components were accelerated. Global disruption made Canada's EV strategy not just desirable, but essential. In a surprising twist, Japanese and European automakers forged a temporary alliance, agreeing to pool parts inventories across borders. This cross-continental safety net underscored a hard truth in a deeply connected global economy. No nation, no matter how large or wealthy, could truly shield itself from its neighbors' economic upheaval. Tech sectors calculated response. As manufacturing giants scrambled to adjust, attention turned to the tech world's role in navigating the chaos. In Silicon Valley, Apple's hush-hush automotive division convened for an emergency session, focused on safeguarding operations at a threatened battery plant in Montreal. A leaked internal memo outlined a radical move, relocating core R&D teams to Guadalajara under a newly proposed Mexico-Canada innovation corridor. Cloud infrastructure providers also sprang into action. Calgary and Dallas became the sites of rushed data center expansions to ensure engineers and designers could collaborate remotely as travel restrictions and logistical snarls worsened. Teams that once relied on in-person site visits now operated in virtual war rooms, live editing code and prototype specs across time zones. Still, the limitations of digital workarounds became painfully clear. At an Ontario facility installing next-generation robotics, progress ground to a halt when precision parts failed to arrive by air. Remote cameras and sensors helped bridge some gaps, but couldn't replace the hands-on expertise of skilled technicians. For some, the disruption offered new opportunities. Aisha Khan, a Canadian software architect, made the move to Guadalajara, drawn by an incentive program that offered tax breaks for high-skilled tech workers. She was far from alone. Online communities lit up with similar stories. Engineers, coders, and systems specialists relocating in response to a crisis that was reshaping not just supply chains, but lives. As the crisis deepened, workers, both digital and physical, began crossing borders to escape the growing fallout. A bombshell leaked from within government circles. Ottawa was reportedly in advanced negotiations with Chinese tech firms to secure critical component supplies.